The morning started the way most mornings did, at the small corner cafe. The air smelled of warm bread and fresh coffee, and soft music played in the background. People came in slowly, shaking off the cold outside as they settled into their favorite spots. Some brought laptops, some read newspapers, and others simply enjoyed a quiet moment before their busy day began. The waitress moved from table to table with a gentle smile. She had been working there for a while, long enough to know what many regulars liked before they even ordered. Some liked extra sugar, some wanted no foam on their cappuccino, and some preferred their tea extra hot. She remembered all these small details without needing to write them down. Customers liked her for that. They said she made the cafe feel warm. She woke up early every day, sometimes before the sun came up. She got ready without making noise because she lived with her younger brother who was still studying. She didn't want to disturb him. She always reminded herself that she needed to keep going for him. She worked 2 jobs to support him, and though it was tiring, she never complained. She believed that if she stayed patient, something better would eventually come. That day, she felt a little more tired than usual, but she kept her smile. The cafe had been busier than normal, and she barely had time to rest. Still, she greeted each customer kindly. She believed that kindness was something everyone deserved, no matter how her own day was going. Around mid-morning, the door opened again, but this time the energy shifted slightly. A man in an expensive suit walked in. He looked like he had somewhere important to be. His shoes were shiny, his watch looked new and expensive, and his expression said that he didn't have much patience for anything. People in the cafe glanced at him, but didn't stare. They could tell he was someone with power or money, or maybe both. The waitress walked over to him with her usual smile. She tried not to judge people based on what they wore. Some well-dressed people were rude, but some were kind. And sometimes people who looked simple had the kindest hearts. So she didn't assume anything. "Good morning," she said softly. "Would you like to sit anywhere special?" He didn't even look at her at first. He just waved his hand toward a corner table as if he were dismissing her. She nodded politely and guided him toward the table. As she placed the menu in front of him, he finally looked up. His eyes scanned her quickly, and his expression hardened, almost like he had already decided she wasn't worth his time. "Do you have anything that isn't cheap on this menu?" he asked. His tone was sharp and loud enough for nearby customers to hear. The waitress blinked slowly, trying not to react. "We have a variety of items," she answered calmly. "If you tell me what you're looking for, I can help you choose." "Want something decent," he said. "Not whatever you usually serve the people who come here for free Wi-Fi." The comment made a few customers shift uncomfortably. The man didn't notice, or maybe he didn't care. The waitress nodded again and pointed to a few items. "These are some of the higher-end dishes we offer. They're freshly made every morning," he sighed loudly. "I guess that will have to do. Bring me the most expensive thing you have, and make sure it's hot. Last time I came to a place like this, the food was cold. I can't deal with sloppy service." She wrote down the order and thanked him before walking away. As she headed back to the counter, she heard him mutter something under his breath about slow service and untrained staff. Behind the counter, the cafe owner raised his eyebrows slightly. He had seen customers like this before. He gave her a sympathetic look, but she just smiled and continued working. In the back corner of the cafe, an older man sat quietly with a cup of tea. He looked simple, with a plain jacket and calm eyes. He had been reading a newspaper earlier, but now he was watching the room more than the pages in front of him. He had noticed the way the waitress carried herself. He had noticed the way the well-dressed man spoke to her. Something about the older man's presence felt peaceful. Customers didn't pay much attention to him, but the waitress always greeted him kindly when he came in. He was a regular, though he never talked much about his life. He simply enjoyed sitting in that spot, reading or thinking. The waitress continued her work, serving other customers while keeping an eye on the kitchen. She checked twice to make sure the man's order was hot and well prepared. She didn't want to give him any reason to be upset. When the food was ready, she carefully carried the plate over to his table. "Here you go," she said gently. "Please be careful, it's very hot." He looked at the plate, then at her. "Took you long enough," he said. Do you people not know how to move faster? I'm sorry for the wait, she replied softly. The kitchen is a bit busy this morning. He shook his head and laughed quietly. Busy? This place shouldn't even be this slow. Honestly, I don't know how people can work in a place like this and still make mistakes. She didn't answer. Sometimes silence was better than trying to defend herself. She just stepped back and let him eat. But the man didn't eat quietly. Every small thing bothered him. He complained that the fork wasn't shiny enough. He complained that the napkin felt rough. He even complained about the light coming from the window, saying it was hurting his eyes. The waitress continued to serve other customers, but she could feel herself getting a little drained. She wasn't someone who took things personally, but some words still stung. Still, she kept smiling for the other people in the cafe every now and then. The older man watched her with thoughtful eyes. He could see the way she stayed calm, even when someone treated her poorly. He noticed how she apologized even when she wasn't at fault. He noticed that she didn't roll her eyes, didn't sigh loudly, didn't let her frustration show. Meanwhile, the man in the suit went on with his behavior. He made loud phone calls, talking about deals and investments. He spoke as if everyone in the cafe needed to hear about how important he was. He bragged about new buildings, new projects, and big numbers. He talked about people under him and how they needed constant reminders to stay in line. A few customers exchanged glances, amused but also annoyed. No one said anything, though. They just continued eating quietly. After a while, the man waved his hand to call the waitress over. "You," he said, not even using her name. "This tea is too cold. Get me another one, and make it hotter this time. I don't know how you expect people to enjoy anything here if you can't even get tea right." She took the cup with steady hands. "I'll bring you a fresh one." As she walked away, she heard him laugh and say something to himself about how some people never aim higher in life. His voice was loud enough that she couldn't ignore it. She sighed quietly once she reached the counter. She poured a fresh cup of hot tea, checking the temperature twice. She blew out a slow breath before walking back. The older man watched the whole moment. He placed his newspaper down, his expression unreadable. When she returned with the tea, the man didn't thank her. He simply took the cup and started sipping loudly. The waitress stepped back again, letting him be. A few minutes passed before the man started complaining again. "This place is unbelievable," he said loudly. "I don't know why people waste their time here. Look at this crowd. Half of them look like they came here just to sit for hours with one cup of coffee. And the staff, well, you've seen them." The older man in the corner moved slightly, as if he was thinking about getting up, but he didn't. Not yet. The cafe owner heard some of the comments, and he walked toward the waitress quietly. "Are you okay?" he whispered. She nodded and forced a small smile. "I'm fine." "It's not the first time." The owner frowned, wishing he could do something. But the man was still a paying customer, and causing a scene would only make things worse. The waitress continued to work. She checked on other tables, filled water glasses, and helped a mother with a stroller find a comfortable place to sit. She carried plates, wiped tables, and greeted people as they came in. Even though she felt tired, she didn't show it. The man in the suit noticed her calmness and seemed annoyed by it. Maybe he expected her to get angry or cry or react in some way, but she didn't. She stayed composed. He snapped his fingers to call her again. "Hey," he said, "do you plan to ever clean this table?" "Look at this spot on the corner." She walked over and wiped the small spot he pointed to. It was barely noticeable. "Sorry about that," she said. He smirked as if he had won something. "What's your goal in life?" he asked suddenly. "Do you plan to stay a waitress forever?" She looked at him, surprised. "I'm just doing what I can right now," she answered. "Everyone starts somewhere." "It's not everyone," he said proudly. "Some people work hard enough to rise above. Ordinary jobs." She didn't say anything. She wiped the last corner of the table. The older man finally stood up. He stretched his arms slowly and walked toward the counter, but he paused when he reached the waitress. "You're doing a good job," he said gently, his voice soft but sincere. She looked at him with tired eyes and smiled. "Thank you." The man in the suit rolled his eyes. "Oh, please," he said. "Don't start encouraging her. People like her need to hear the truth. She won't get anywhere if she keeps doing small jobs and thinking it's enough." The older man turned his head slightly, but he didn't respond yet. Instead, he ordered another cup of tea and sat back down. Watching quietly, the waitress went back to her duties, her smile returning slowly. She didn't know who the older man was, and she didn't know why he seemed to be watching everything. But she felt grateful for his kind words. The man in the suit continued eating, unaware that someone important was paying attention to how he treated people. The cafe kept moving around them, cups clinking, chairs sliding, customers chatting softly, but a quiet tension stayed in the air, and though the waitress didn't know it yet, this ordinary morning was about to change her life in ways she never expected. The morning rush had finally eased, leaving the cafe quieter than before. A few customers still sat near the windows, enjoying the soft sunlight that filtered through the glass. The waitress took a moment to breathe as she leaned lightly against the counter, rubbing her wrist gently. She did not complain, not to herself and not to anyone else. She simply knew she had to keep going. The man in the suit, however, showed no signs of calming down. He tapped his fingers against the table impatiently, as if the world should move by his rhythm alone. Every so often, he lifted his cup, took a sip, and then placed it down with a sharp click that made nearby customers flinch. "Do people really find this place comfortable?" he said out loud to no one in particular. But his voice was directed at the room, meant to be heard. "I haven't been to cafes around the world. This one feels like it's stuck in time, and not in a charming way." The waitress heard him, but kept her expression gentle. She picked up a tray and began clearing a table nearby. She moved carefully, making sure not to disturb anyone. The older man in the corner watched everything quietly. There was something thoughtful in the way he observed the room, like he was taking notes in his mind. He sipped his tea slowly, though it had probably gone cold by now. After clearing the table, the waitress walked back to the counter to sort the plates and cups. She wiped her hands on her apron and reached for a clean cloth to polish the glasses. The work never truly stopped, even on slow days. The cafe owner stepped out from the kitchen, carrying a stack of fresh pastries. "Are you holding up all right?" he asked her softly. She nodded with a small smile. "I'm okay. Just a bit tired, that's all." He glanced at the man in the suit and lowered his voice. "Don't let that one get to you. Some people forget how to talk to others." "It's fine," she replied. "He'll be gone soon." But she wasn't sure if she believed that. The owner placed the pastries on display and went back to the kitchen, leaving her alone at the counter. She continued polishing the glasses, trying to keep her focus on her work. A moment later, she felt eyes on her. She turned and saw the older man smiling gently from his seat. "Don't worry," he said softly. "People like you make places like this special." She smiled back, grateful for the kindness. But before she could say anything, the man in the suit snapped his fingers loudly. "You. Over here?" he called out. She set down the glass and walked toward his table. "Yes, sir?" He leaned back in his chair, looking displeased. "This place is too noisy. Can't you people control your customers?" "I'm trying to think here." His complaint surprised her. The cafe was almost silent, except for soft music and quiet conversations. But she kept her tone calm. "I'm sorry if it feels noisy to you. I can lower the music a little if you like." "Do that," he said, waving his hand as if dismissing her. She nodded and walked to the small control panel near the counter. She lowered the volume gently, making sure not to make it awkwardly quiet. When she returned to the dining area, she noticed the older man had set his newspaper aside again. He watched the man in the suit with quiet curiosity. The man in the suit suddenly stood up. "You know what? I need a better seat. Somewhere less irritating." He looked around the cafe and pointed toward a table near the window. "That one. Move me there." The waitress blinked slowly. The table was already taken by an elderly woman reading a book. "Sorry, sir. That table is occupied." "So, ask her to move," he demanded, loud enough that the woman looked up, startled. The cafe fell silent for a moment. The waitress swallowed hard. I can't ask someone to move from their seat if they're already settled. But if you'd like another table, I can help you find one." He stared at her with disbelief, then frustration. "Do you know who I am?" A couple of customers exchanged looks. Even the cafe owner peeked out from the kitchen. The waitress kept her voice gentle. "I'm sorry, sir, but I can't disturb another customer." He shook his head and sat back down heavily. Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. No wonder this place isn't more successful. With staff like this, how can it be? Though hurt, the waitress didn't show it. She simply stepped back and continued her work. But the older man in the corner finally spoke up. "Young lady," he called gently. She turned toward him. "Do you have a moment?" She approached his table with a soft smile. "Of course. What can I get for you?" He looked at her with warm eyes. "Nothing for now. I just wanted to ask, how long have you been working here?" The question surprised her, but she answered honestly. "Almost 3 years, and you work mornings and evenings?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes, I work another job after this one. Must be tiring," he murmured. "A little," she admitted with a shy smile, "but it's okay. I'm doing it for my younger brother. He's still studying. I want him to finish school without worrying about money." The man nodded slowly, admiration clear in his eyes. "That's very kind of you. Not many people carry such responsibility with this much grace." Before she could reply, the man in the suit let out a loud, mocking laugh. "Please," he said, "don't make her sound like some kind of hero. She's just doing small work. People with ambition don't waste time serving tables." His words cut through the air like a sharp blade. The cafe grew quiet again. The older man turned his head slowly, his expression calm but serious. "There's nothing small about honest work," he said softly. The man in the suit smirked. "Easy for someone like you to say? You probably don't know how the real world works." The older man didn't argue. He simply took a sip of his tea. The waitress felt embarrassed, not for herself, but for the way the conversation was unfolding. "I should get back to work," she said softly. The older man nodded. "Of course. Thank you for always being kind." She walked toward the counter, her steps a little slower than before. She didn't want anyone to feel sorry for her. She was used to working hard. She was used to long hours and rude customers. But still, some days were heavier than others. The man in the suit picked up his phone again and began speaking loudly. "You wouldn't believe the service in this place," he told someone. "It's like people here don't even try. I'm surrounded by incompetence." The waitress tried not to listen. She kept herself busy, cleaning, organizing, serving others. But the older man listened. And with every word spoken by the man in the suit, something in his expression shifted. Something quiet, something thoughtful. After a few minutes, the cafe door opened again and a small family walked in. The waitress greeted them warmly and helped them find a table. She brought them menus and water. She took their order with a smile that felt more natural now. Watching her, the older man's respect for her only grew. Meanwhile, the man in the suit continued complaining. "This whole part of town needs improvement," he said over the phone. "No wonder businesses struggle here. Everything is so outdated." The older man set down his cup again. He leaned back in his chair, observing the man carefully. Finally, after almost an hour, the man in the suit seemed ready to leave. He stood up, pulled out his wallet, and dropped a few coins on the table, barely enough to cover a fraction of the bill. The waitress approached him gently. "Sir, I'm sorry, but this doesn't cover your meal." He looked at her as if she had insulted him. "Are you serious? You're going to bother me over a little money?" "Sir, I'm just doing my job. I can bring you the bill if you'd like." He scoffed loudly. "Fine, bring it." She fetched the bill and placed it in front of him. He scanned it with irritation. "This is ridiculous. I've had better meals for less." But he eventually paid, grumbling under his breath the entire time, before leaving. He looked at the waitress once more and said, "You should rethink your career. This kind of work won't get you far." The words lingered in the air even after he walked out. The cafe fell silent, as if everyone waited for something uncertain. The older man finally stood up. He walked to the counter and placed a generous tip into the small glass jar. "For your kindness," he said softly, "and for your patience." She looked at him with tired but grateful eyes. "Thank you. Really," he nodded gently. "Some people don't know how much strength it takes to stay kind, but some of us notice." Before he left, he added quietly, "You never know who's watching." His words stayed with her long after he stepped outside. Disappearing into the sunlight, she didn't know yet that her life was already beginning to change. The rest of the day moved slowly after the man in the suit left. The air inside the cafe finally felt lighter, as if the tension he brought with him had walked out the door. Customers began to talk again, and laughter returned in small waves. The waitress felt she could breathe more freely now, though she still felt a strange heaviness in her chest from the way he had spoken to her. She didn't like carrying these feelings, but she was human. Words could hurt, especially when spoken loudly, as though she were not a person but something to talk over. Still, she reminded herself that most people who came in were kind. One rude customer was not enough to make her lose her warmth. As she wiped down the tables, the cafe owner came over slowly. "He's gone?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "Yes, finally." The owner shook his head. "People like that think the world owes them something. You handled it well. Better than most would have." She smiled softly. "I'm fine, really." He wanted to believe her, and maybe he did. But he could see the tiredness in her eyes. She had worked long hours this week, and morning shifts were always the hardest. By afternoon, things slowed down even more. Only a few customers remained, and the sun began to make the windows glow with soft light. The waitress stepped outside for a short break. Breathing in the fresh air, a cool breeze brushed past her, and for a moment, she let herself relax. She had no way of knowing that the simple older man who sat in the corner earlier had seen everything, not just her patience and kindness, but also the quiet strength she carried. And even though she didn't yet know who he really was, her life was slowly being shaped by his observations. Inside, the cafe owner took over at the counter, letting her have a few minutes to herself as she stood outside. Someone unexpectedly approached her, a woman in business casual clothing, holding a notebook and looking slightly nervous. Walked up with a gentle smile. "Hi, excuse me," the woman said softly. "Do you work here?" The waitress nodded. "Yes, can I help you?" The woman hesitated before saying, "I was here earlier, during that situation with the man in the suit. I just wanted to say you handled it very well. I would have lost my patience." The waitress felt her cheeks warm slightly. "Thank you. I appreciate that. I admire how calm you stayed," the woman continued. "You didn't raise your voice once. It takes a lot of strength to do that." The waitress shook her head gently. "It's just part of the job." "No," the woman insisted kindly. "It's part of who you are." Before the waitress could respond, the woman's phone buzzed loudly. She looked down at it and sighed. "I have to run. But seriously, you're doing great. Don't let rude people change you." She offered a small wave and hurried off. The waitress watched her leave, feeling strangely thankful. She wasn't used to receiving compliments. Most people didn't notice the work behind the smile. After a few more minutes, she stepped back inside, ready to finish her shift. The cafe owner came over. "Feeling better?" "A little," she said honestly. The rest of her shift passed quietly. Customers ordered gently, tipped generously, and many of them smiled warmly when she approached. It was almost as if they were making up for the man's earlier behavior, but even with the calmness, she couldn't shake the thought of the older man's last words before he left. Asterisk, "You never know who's watching." Asterisk, the words echoed in her mind, not in a frightening way, but in a way that felt meaningful. She didn't know why he said it or what he meant, but something about the tone of his voice stayed with her. Later in the afternoon, the cafe bell rang again. She looked up and smiled automatically. But this time, it wasn't a customer, it was the delivery guy. Bringing boxes of supplies for the cafe, she signed the papers and carried the boxes inside. The owner helped her open and organize them. "You should take tomorrow morning off," the owner suddenly said. She blinked. "Why?" "Because you've been working non-stop, and I can see you're tired." "Just take the morning." Come in the afternoon if you can. She hesitated, but she appreciated the thought. Okay, thank you. I will. The owner smiled. Good. Your brother will be happy to see you rest a little. She laughed softly. Probably. He says I work too much. He's right, the owner chuckled. Her shift finally ended after what felt like a very long day. She changed out of her apron, grabbed her bag, and headed home. On the way, she passed small shops, street vendors, and families heading out for errands. A few kids ran by laughing, and she smiled at the sound. Her neighborhood was simple but full of life, and though she didn't have much, she never complained. She was grateful for what she did have. When she reached her small apartment, her younger brother opened the door before she even knocked. You're home early, he said with surprise. She shrugged with a smile. My boss told me to take tomorrow morning off. Good, he said seriously. You need sleep. You look tired. She laughed. Thank you for the honesty. They spent the evening together, cooking a simple meal and talking about school and work. Her brother told her about his classes, his homework, and the funny things that happened with his friends. These small moments were what she lived for. After dinner, she washed the dishes while her brother finished some homework. Then they both sat on the couch, watching a silly show that made them laugh. For a moment, her mind was free from the day's heaviness, but little did she know, things were shifting behind the scenes, somewhere across town. In a quiet office located on one of the upper floors of a modern building, the older man from the cafe sat at a polished desk. He was no longer dressed in the simple jacket he wore earlier. Now, he looked every bit like the accomplished figure he truly was. A respected businessman, one of the most influential in the city. But he valued humility. He valued authenticity. That was why he liked to blend in. To see the world without people pretending around him. A younger assistant entered the office. Sir, the documents you requested are ready. Also, the team is waiting for confirmation for tomorrow's meeting. The man nodded. Tell them I'll be there, and make sure everything is prepared for the inspection of the new project site. The assistant nodded and left. The older man leaned back in his chair, thinking he remembered the waitress, the way she held herself, the way she didn't raise her voice, the way she continued being kind, even when insulted. He also remembered the man in the suit. He recognized him. Not in a personal sense, but professionally, the man in the suit worked in the same industry. He was a loud figure, known for trying to impress people with his wealth and position. He liked to talk down to others, especially those he saw as beneath him. The older man had crossed paths with him once or twice. And now, after seeing how he behaved in a normal setting, the older man felt disappointed but not surprised. He made a mental note. People showed their true selves. When they thought no one important was watching, the following morning, the waitress enjoyed a rare, slow morning at home. She slept a little longer, made breakfast with her brother, and even sat with him while he studied. It felt peaceful, around noon. She prepared to head to the cafe for her afternoon shift as she tied her hair and put on her apron. She felt refreshed. On her way to work, she noticed people were gathering around the front of the cafe. It looked unusual, almost like something unexpected was happening. She walked closer, curious, but nothing could have prepared her for what she saw. A group of professionally dressed men stood outside, talking quietly. And in the center of them stood the older man from the day before. Her heart skipped. What was he doing there? She glanced at the cafe owner, who stood beside them, looking both excited and nervous. The older man turned when he saw her and smiled gently. Good afternoon, he said in a warm tone. She blinked, stunned. Good afternoon. The people around him stepped aside slightly, as if making room for him. I was hoping to speak with you, he said kindly. She looked between him, the cafe owner, and the group of men who clearly worked with him. Something big was happening, but she didn't know yet just how big, and she didn't know that the man from the suit, the one who insulted her the day before, was about to face a truth that would shake him completely, because the person he had mocked and the person he had unknowingly disrespected wasn't just a waitress. She was someone the older Man wanted to help, and he had the power to change everything, not just for her. But for everyone involved, the story was only beginning to unfold. The moment the older man stood up from his corner table, the whole mood inside the cafe changed, even though he hadn't said much yet. It was strange how someone could move so quietly and still shift the air around them. He didn't walk toward the Tycoon at first. He simply stepped a little closer to the counter, as if wanting a better look at the waitress who had been holding herself together for so long. The waitress had just sat down, tray near the sink. She looked tired, but she still had that gentle smile she always tried to keep on her face. The kind that made customers feel safe, even on difficult days. When she saw the older man standing a few steps away from her, she looked confused at first, almost like she wasn't sure she had done something wrong. But the man shook his head softly, offering a warm nod that calmed her a little. He didn't speak yet. He was simply observing, almost like he wanted to remember her face, her patience, the quiet strength she had shown while being treated badly. The cafe owner, who had been pretending to clean the espresso machine while keeping one eye on the situation, suddenly froze. He squinted at the older man for a moment, blinked, and then blinked again. His hand dropped the cloth he was holding. It fell onto the counter without a sound, but his reaction made it feel louder than it should have. "Is that?" he whispered under his breath. A customer who had been sitting near the window looked over and followed the owner's gaze. Their eyes widened. Then another customer recognized him too. Whisper after whisper began to grow among the tables. The older man was famous, but not in the loud, showy way people usually imagine. His face wasn't in newspapers every day. He wasn't the type who craved attention. Instead, he was respected because of what he did quietly. People knew him for lifting others up, for investing in small businesses, for creating opportunities in neighborhoods that most wealthy people ignored. Even without his name being spoken in the cafe, the recognition spread. A few customers leaned toward each other, whispering things like, "That's him, and I can't believe he's here, and he's the one who helped build those community centers." But the Tycoon, too wrapped up in his own inflated sense of importance, still hadn't noticed anything. He was scrolling through his phone with a smug look, as if expecting a message that would prove once again how important he thought he was. He seemed to care more about how he looked sitting there than about the people around him. The owner quietly stepped closer to him and whispered, "Sir, we have a very special guest today." He didn't say a name, but his voice carried a mix of fear and respect. The Tycoon raised an eyebrow. "Special guest? In a place like this?" he said with a little laugh. The owner swallowed and tilted his head toward the older man. "Over there, in the corner." The Tycoon glanced over lazily, but then he froze. His eyes widened. His posture shifted to one of sudden panic. He recognized the older man instantly and felt something drop inside his stomach. The older man didn't ask for attention. He didn't stand like someone expecting respect. But the weight of who he was hung in the air. His presence alone revealed everything. The kind, soft-spoken man who had listened to the waitress with genuine interest was someone whose decisions could change the future of entire companies. Someone whose opinion mattered in boardrooms across the city. Someone who had more influence than the Tycoon could ever dream of. The Tycoon's arrogance drained out of his face. The confidence he had worn like armor was suddenly thin and cracking. He smoothed his jacket, cleared his throat, and forced a smile that looked painfully unnatural. He started walking toward the older man. But the older man held up a hand before he could speak. It wasn't rude. It was just a simple gesture of boundaries, something the Tycoon wasn't. Used to being on the receiving end of, the older man turned back to the waitress instead. "I saw how you handled yourself today," he said softly. His voice was gentle, but every word carried weight. "You didn't raise your voice. You didn't lose your kindness. You kept doing your job even when things were unfair." The waitress didn't know how to respond at first. She wasn't used to being noticed like this. She felt her cheeks warm, and she wiped her hands nervously on her apron. "I just try to do my work," she said quietly. "And you do it well," the older man replied. He looked around the cafe, then back at her. It takes strength to stay calm when someone tries to belittle you. Not everyone can do that. The tycoon shifted uncomfortably, knowing those words had been aimed at him as well. One of the customers near the back couldn't help but smile at the scene. It was almost poetic in a way how someone who treated others with everyday kindness was now being recognized by someone who truly mattered. The older man then lowered his voice a little, speaking gently. "You mentioned earlier that you work 2 jobs. The waitress nodded. "Yes, sir. My younger brother is still in school. I try to help him with his fees so he doesn't fall behind." The older man looked at her with admiration. "Your dedication is rare." Then he did something no one expected. He turned to the cafe owner. "How long has she been working here?" "Almost 3 years," the owner said. "She is one of the most reliable people I've ever hired." The older man nodded thoughtfully. "I can see that." Finally, he looked at the tycoon. The silence that followed was heavy. The tycoon tried to look composed, but his eyes betrayed him. He looked like someone who knew the ground beneath him was about to shift. The older man spoke calmly, but each word felt like a mirror being held up to the tycoon's face. "I've seen you in boardrooms before," he said. "You speak about leadership often. You talk about building companies and guiding teams." The tycoon swallowed hard. "But leadership," the older man continued, "isn't shown by how loudly you talk or how important you believe you are. Leadership is shown by how you treat people when you think no one is watching." The cafe went silent. Even the sound of spoons stirring cups had stopped. The tycoon opened his mouth, but the older man gently shook his head as if telling him there was nothing left to explain. "You showed disrespect today," he said. "Not because she deserved it, but because you assumed she couldn't do anything about it. Because you assumed she was beneath you." The tycoon felt the words strike deeper than he expected. It wasn't just embarrassment, there was shame mixed into it too. "You forgot something important," the older man said. "Every person has value. No one is beneath you." The waitress stood very still, not because she wanted to witness his shame, but because she didn't know how to process everything happening around her. The older man looked back at her, and his expression softened again. "You deserve to work in a place where people speak to you with respect," he said. "You have the work ethic and heart that many companies look for." Then, almost casually, as if it were the most normal thing in the world, he added, "If you're open to it, I can connect you with a position in one of my organizations, a place where your dedication will be valued." The waitress gasped softly. She didn't know what to say. The idea felt too big, too unreal. Like she might wake up and find out she imagined the whole moment. The cafe owner looked proud, unable to hide his smile. The customers around the room watched with quiet joy, feeling like they had just witnessed something extraordinary. And the tycoon looked like everything inside him had crashed at once. He tried to step forward and force a smile. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding," he said quickly. "I didn't mean." The older man didn't raise his voice, but his calm interruption felt stronger than any shout. "No misunderstanding," he said. "I heard everything." The tycoon lowered his eyes. The older man gave the waitress a small card. "Take your time to think about it," he said. "You don't have to decide now." She nodded slowly, holding the card as if it were something fragile. The older man then turned and began walking toward the door. He didn't look back at the tycoon. He didn't need to. His message had already been delivered. Before leaving, he paused for one last moment, speaking loud enough for only the waitress to hear. "You're stronger than you think," he said. "Don't forget that." And he walked out into the bright afternoon light, inside the cafe. The world felt still for a moment. The tycoon stood frozen, unsure if he should stay or leave, unsure of everything now. And the waitress, she stood holding the small card, feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The cafe slowly returned to its usual sounds. But nothing really felt normal. People were whispering softly, sharing glances that carried the weight of what they had just witnessed. Even the soft music playing from the small speaker near the counter felt different, almost like it knew something important had happened. The waitress stood there holding the small card the older man had given her. It was simple, nothing fancy, but it felt heavier than anything she had ever held before. Her fingers trembled a little as she stared at it. She didn't need to flip it over to know his name. She had heard it whispered around the cafe a dozen times. She had seen it on buildings, community centers, and scholarships and local news stories. She took a deep breath, trying to stop herself from crying, not out of sadness, but because she had no idea how to handle such kindness. It felt overwhelming, unreal. For years she had worked quietly, doing everything she could to support her younger brother, never expecting anything in return. She had gotten used to being invisible to people who rushed through their day, but today someone important had seen her. Not for how she looked, not for what job she had, but for who she was. The Tycoon stood nearby, frozen in place. He tried to adjust his suit jacket again, as if fixing his appearance would fix what had already happened. He cleared his throat, then stepped forward with a forced smile. "Listen," he began, his voice shaky but attempting confidence. "I think things got a little out of hand earlier. I didn't mean to upset you. I was just having a stressful day." She didn't look angry. She just nodded once, polite but distant. "It's okay," she said softly. She meant it not because she forgave everything easily, but because she wasn't the type to hold on to anger. The Tycoon wanted to say more. Something that would make him feel better, but he could tell she wasn't looking for a long explanation. She had already shown more grace than he deserved. He stepped back awkwardly. The confidence he had walked in with earlier was gone. The cafe owner walked up to the waitress with a gentle smile. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded again, though she still didn't look entirely steady. He leaned closer and lowered his voice. "You deserve it," he whispered. "Don't doubt that." Then he stepped away, giving her space. After a few minutes, customers began leaving, though many of them paused to give the waitress a supportive smile or a small nod before walking out the door. Each small gesture warmed her heart, reminding her she wasn't alone, even on days that felt too heavy. When the cafe quieted down again, the owner encouraged her to take a short break. She stepped outside, needing fresh air. The cool breeze brushed against her face, helping her settle her thoughts. She looked down at the card again. She could hardly believe it. A job at one of his organizations? A place where she wouldn't have to juggle the shifts. Where she could actually breathe. Where she could finally build something for herself and her brother. It felt too big. Too hopeful. She tucked the card safely into her apron pocket and closed her eyes for a moment. She thought about her brother, about how much she wanted him to grow up without worrying the way she had to. She thought about the long nights, the double shifts, the sacrifices she never talked about. Maybe this moment wasn't luck. Maybe it was the result of every day she kept going, even when it was hard. When her break ended, she returned inside. The Tycoon was gone. Only a few customers remained, quietly sipping their drinks. As she moved behind the counter, the cafe door opened again. For a second, her heart jumped, thinking the older man had returned. But it wasn't him. Instead, a delivery worker walked in with a small envelope. "Delivery for you," he said. "For me?" she asked, confused. "Yeah, someone handed it to me outside and said to bring it in." The worker shrugged and left. She carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a short handwritten note. Asterisk, you don't owe anyone an explanation for your dreams. When you're ready, call the number on the card. Opportunities wait for those who show heart. A friend asterisk, she stared at the words, her eyes slowly filling with tears. She pressed the note to her chest for a moment. She didn't know what her future would look like, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like the door was open. The rest of her shift passed quietly. She worked with a lighter step, feeling something warm inside her growing. She kept touching the card in her pocket just to reassure herself that it was real late in the afternoon. When the cafe was almost empty, she finally finished her shift and changed out of her apron. The owner smiled at her as she prepared to leave. "Think about your future," he said gently. "It's okay to choose a new path. You've earned it." Then she nodded with emotion in her eyes. "Thank you for everything." She stepped outside into the evening air. The sky was painted with soft colors, pinks, golds, and blues blending into each other. It felt like the world was telling her something. She walked slowly toward the bus stop, but halfway there she paused. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the card again. Her fingers ran over the simple lettering. It felt warm now, familiar. She smiled to herself. Then she made a decision. She pulled out her phone, took a deep breath, and dialed the number. The call rang once, twice, and then she heard a calm voice answer. "This is the office. How may I help you?" She swallowed, her voice steady but filled with new courage. "Hi, I was told I could call about an opportunity. My name is..." Before she could finish, the receptionist gently interrupted. "Yes, we were expecting your call. One moment, please. Let me transfer you." Her heart jumped. Expecting her? She hadn't even called yet. A soft click sounded, then a familiar voice came on the line. "I'm glad you called," the older man said. Her breath caught in her throat. I wasn't sure I should." "You should," he said warmly. "Not because of what happened today, but because of who you are. Dedication deserves opportunity." She didn't know what to say. She felt a tear fall silently down her cheek. "Come by the office tomorrow," he continued. "We'll find something that fits your strengths, and we'll make sure you have time to focus on your brother's education as well." Her hand covered her mouth in disbelief. "Thank you. I don't know how to express." "You don't have to," he said softly. "Just keep showing the same heart you showed today." After the call ended, she stood there for a long moment, staring up at the darkening sky. The weight she had carried for so long felt lighter. Hope was no longer a distant dream, it was right in front of her. The next morning came faster than she expected. She woke early, dressed carefully, and made sure her brother had everything he needed for school. When she looked at him, she felt even more sure that she was making the right choice. As she stood at the bus stop, the sun rising behind her, she held the card in her hand one last time. She didn't need its reassurance anymore. But she kept it anyway, because it reminded her of the moment someone saw her worth. When she arrived at the office building, its tall glass windows reflected the morning light. People walked in and out with purpose. She felt a little nervous, but also excited. Inside, she was greeted kindly. The staff treated her with respect from the first moment, offering her water, making her feel welcome. It was a world so different from what she was used to. When the older man finally walked in to meet her, his warm smile made her shoulders relax. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded. Yes. He guided her to a meeting room where they talked about her skills, her goals, and what kind of work she felt drawn to. He listened patiently, never rushing her, never doubting her abilities. By the end of the conversation, he offered her a position, one with fair pay, opportunities for training, and room to grow. She accepted with tears in her eyes. The older man smiled gently. "This is only the beginning," he said. "I'm certain you'll go far." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of learning and adjusting. She struggled at times, but she worked hard and kept pushing forward. Her coworkers were supportive. She found herself smiling more than she had in years. Her brother noticed the change too. He studied with new energy, proud of her and inspired by her determination. As for the Tycoon, news spread quickly about what had happened in the cafe. When the older man withdrew his interest in partnering with him, investors took notice. The Tycoon found his once stable world shaking. He tried to repair the damage, but people had started questioning his character. And trust was not something that came easily. He thought often about the cafe, the waitress he had spoken down to, and the older man's words. For the first time in a long time, he reflected on himself, freely reflected. Maybe this was the moment he needed to change. Though no one knew how his story would unfold. But the waitress's story, her story, was just beginning. Months later, she walked into the cafe on a day off, smiling brightly as she greeted the owner. The customers who recognized her gave her warm smiles. Proud to see her doing well, she ordered her favorite drink and sat by the window. Watching the world outside, her phone buzzed with a message from her brother. Another good grade. Another step toward a future he once thought impossible. She leaned back in her chair, her heart full. Life had changed, not because she had asked for help, but because she had shown kindness even on the hardest days. And someone who understood the value of that kindness had given her a chance. It was proof that sometimes the smallest moments can open the biggest doors, and she was ready to walk through every single one.